James, we are live. How are you?
Great. How about yourself, Tony?
Good. Hey, I'm real excited to have you on the show, and normally there's like a little queue where, it may not get posted for a couple of weeks, but in light of everything going on with what happened in Florida, your specialty, your not just your background, but your current job. I'm gonna pump this out really fast because I think people need to hear what you're going to say. And I'm not going to do as good a job as you, but I'm going to actually put you on the spot and let people learn a little bit about you by explaining your background with the FBI and your current relationship with the GAVIN DE BECKER company.
Okay. Yeah, great. Coming out of college, I wanted to go in the Marine Corps, failed my flight physical. So turned to law enforcement and just kind of had a drive to do that. I got some great advice from an FBI guy. He said, we will not hire you out of college. He says to go be a cop or go to law school. I'm like, I'm not going to law school. So I became a deputy sheriff in Columbia, South Carolina for 5 years. Without a doubt, the greatest move I ever made. Because if you hadn't gone in the military, then the proving ground for us is there, right?
Right.
Fake that job. That was real. And had a good friend of mine get killed early on, which really kind of cemented kind of my dedication to survive in primal battle. Like really, that Joe's death really affected me. Did 5 years with the sheriff's department, road dog the whole time, a patrolman, right?
Yep.
And worked some case, and the FBI was involved, and this guy starts recruiting me, and I didn't want to be in the FBI. I was completely happy being a cop. And then he threw the number at me, how much money you'd make. And I was like, okay. That was more than my sheriff was making, right?
Mm-hmm.
97, I joined the FBI, got to Quantico, and did that for about 17 and a half years. I was a field agent, worked in a field office, was on SWAT, did SWAT for 10 years. Got heavily involved in protection and I was on a protective detail for a guy named Robert Mueller. He's far more famous now than he was back then.
Right.
Right. When I say that name now, everyone knows who he is. But back then, they thought he was John Kerry. People would come up and say, "Hey, you're with the congressman or senator." I'm like, "No, that's whatever." Really like that. Great group of agents I was working with. Anyway, did 4 years with him and kind of got that training bug and wanted to go to Quantico. I don't know, try to pass on something to new agents. So in '08, I got promoted to a tactical instructor down at Hogan's Alley. So I was training FBI new agents on utilization of force. So defensive tactics would teach them, how to defend themselves. Firearms destruction would teach them how to press the trigger, and we would teach them when. Right, we would put them in scenarios to really test their courage to see if they would use the weapon appropriately, use it or don't use it type deal. A lot of shoot, no shoot, a lot of real survival was our core, primal battle, really trying to get them to understand the difference between a classroom environment and the real thing. To the best that we could in a training environment anyway. And then I kind of moved over to overseas survival, started teaching that for 3 years, ran the FBI's overseas survival program. And then parallel to that, I created a protection school because we really didn't have the FBI didn't have like a formal protection school. We were kind of doing a lot of on-the-job training. So started a formal protection school at the FBI, started training FBI agents for the Attorney General's detail, Director's detail, trained CIA, NYPD, you name the three-letter agency, they'd send some representative to our school. And that's how I got in touch with Gavin. We were giving out, Gavin De Becker, we were giving out the gift of fear in that overseas survival school because these FBI folks who were going overseas, agents, analysts, spouses, they were not carrying weapons. Unless you're in, a war theater, Iraq, Afghanistan. If you were in London, you're not carrying a gun in London. So
right.
Our job was to teach them to basically, as you say, be your own bodyguard, how to do an effective route analysis, how to look for surveillance, how to do attack avoidance, and basically use your brain as the weapon and not the Glock 19. Loved that, gave out Gift of Fear, learned about this guy named Gavin De Becker. And then in that protection school, I was looking for material, and I heard of this book called Just 2 Seconds. Never read it when I was a protection agent. And I started reading this thing. It's like the Holy Grail. Lights are going off. Like, you need to know this stuff. And
Right.
so I started using a drill in that book called Time and Distance. And Gavin heard about it. He's like, "Are you using my stuff at the FBI Academy?" I'm like, "Oh God, yes, sir." And the relationship began. He recruited me. I left in 2015 and never looked back. And so I do a fair amount of training with the firm here. We're a bodyguard firm. We have almost 800 bodyguards throughout the country. We train every month, and parallel to that, I kind of do a lot of audits of protected details, not just ours, but a company may hire us to look at their CEO's security, and I'll come in and do an audit and kind of make recommendations based on what we're seeing.
Nice. Well, that's kind of a very, very exciting, legit career path. Nice ladder. And, I kind of relate to not to the scope or depth that you're doing, but, going in and giving somebody a real personal evaluation of what I think they're doing. And, I look at confrontation management and how people are training very, very differently than other people. And so, a lot of my assessments they're not received that well. And I tell people, like, I go, like, I'm just trying to make you safer. Don't shoot, don't shoot the messenger type thing. Right. So, we saw one today that I posted where I said, "Hey, I really like this guy. I really like what he's doing." But he's posting this video as an unscripted scenario, except they're at a giant range using a training knife and a training gun, and someone's filming. So, like, there's consent and preparation and awareness. You cannot capture the emotional, psychological duress in that type of event.
Right.
So, and that's missed on a lot of people who mean well. A lot of times when I evaluate something, I think it's people take it so personally. They get a little defensive. I'm going, this is about making you safer. Don't,
Right.
Do you just as like, that's just me rambling a little bit. You made me think about this thing I posted our internal team this morning. Do you get that a lot, or at the level you're at, where probably the people paying for you to do that are real receptive, but maybe the individual PSDs, the protective service guys are a little bit more, a little back up? Like,
yeah, for sure. The last thing you want is you come in and you've got all the answers. You're the burning bush. You've got it all. And you want to have a high degree of humility, right?
Right.
And just like you were saying, it's all about making you, the bodyguard, for instance, making you better. That's it. Assessing your current situation, because it's all different for everybody. And then giving him real tangible recommendations based on like what we know. I say in my classes frequently, because I study these attacks every day, I fervently do not believe that a professional bodyguard steps off with the intention to fail. I don't believe that, right? Like, I see failure and I use the failure as a teaching point, but I just cannot in my heart believe that they intend to do a bad job, right? I just think that they don't have the proper training and experience. And if you don't have any training and all you've had is kind of bad experience, well, then that's where you're operating at, right?
Benchmark, yeah. So let's, I kind of derailed the conversation just because, like, I posted this thing this morning and it was kind of like this little exercise where I said, "Hey, I'm not judging this guy. I love everything he's saying, but he doesn't know what he doesn't know." Right. And that's really, I've always intuitively said, how do we evaluate psychophysical response time? Because it's not the mechanics. Like, everything works in a demo and everything works in a controlled environment. How do we really evaluate and measure the intangible elements of juggling fear and decision making? And that's and that's how originally my whole thing was studying fear, but differentiating between what is popular of when people talk about fight or flight. I was more interested in the psychology of fear, not the biology or physiology of fear. I didn't care if I had adrenaline dump or not. I wanted to understand how the lack of managing fear can hijack your brain and create emotional inertia.
Right.
And I was walking through Barnes and Noble years ago, and this is what I've been lecturing on and talking and researching. And then all of a sudden I see this book, Gift of Fear, and I'm like, oh my God! Like, and I got it, and I've been a fan of the companies for years and had a couple of opportunities to actually, meet several of the people and do a little bit with you guys. Very little. I've always been very impressed with the company. Let's talk a little bit about specifically. I mean, I started off. We had a horrible event in Florida. The more and more we learn, and of course, who knows what's new on the internet, but there's some like serious issues and failures and stuff going on. I don't know if you heard, I don't know if this has been validated or confirmed, that their security cameras were down during this event. Did you hear that?
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if that's real, but it's almost like, we could talk, you talked about, part of your role at the FBI was, someone else is teaching this guy to shoot, someone else is teaching them to move, this guy's teaching them to communicate. And then when they would get to that final iteration of training, it was like about the courage, about the mindset. Will you fight? Will you make the right decision? Do you want to? And there may be some stuff that just because of your relationship and your professional obligations, just say, hey, I can't talk about that if I ask you something. But the obvious thing that's freaking people out is the SRO and the other deputies not going in.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's been a lot of posts, a lot of LinkedIn, and these are friends of mine, and I'm not going to discuss kind of their assertion of what they would do. No one knows. No one knows what they're going to do until they're there, right? Courage is one of those things that everyone's got a little bit of it until you're tested. And, I don't know. I don't know why those guys didn't go in, but I'll tell you what the training says, right? I know what they're trained to do. The training since Columbine is you go in.
Right.
You go in without exception. You don't wait for backup. You don't have 3 or 4 guys it's nice. You form up your wedge and go. But if it's just you and me, Tony, we're going in there, right? Now, what these guys did, what they heard, what they thought, these are very fluid and fast-moving environments. I don't know. But what I do see is frequently I see a video or a training exercise, and they'll say, this is our active shooter training. And the first thing I see is a SWAT truck and a comm tower. Well, wait a minute. That's not an active shooter. That's a tactical dilemma. If you've got the ability and the time to get SWAT out there, well, now you're talking a protracted event. Okay, active shooter is minutes, right? We're not talking hours here. We're talking minutes. So I don't even like to start the SWAT conversation unless it's like LAPD, full-time SWAT, and they're right on the scene, because that's not active shooter, right? That's a tactical dilemma, right? If you look at kind of Parkland, I wrote a position paper on it, posted on LinkedIn about designing of these environments, right? And Grossman, Colonel Grossman's a friend of ours, and he kind of planted the seed in my head about fire, right? And I wrote in the paper, Parkland, I haven't been there, but I'm sure that school has all manner of fire apparatus, right? The alarm, the sprinkler, the extinguishers, the fluorescent signs, the floodlights. And they have to have all that because the fire marshal wouldn't give certificate of occupancy, right, if they didn't have it.
Right.
Yet, we haven't lost a kid in a school fire since 1958, okay? But we lose kids all the time to violence. And yet we don't create environments that are violence, that help the people, right? Because if you go back to the methodology, why is it that we have all this fire stuff? It's because the firemen, professional firemen know, man, I can't get there right away. I got to sustain those humans in that environment when the fire starts so they can save their own lives until we get there, right? Well, why don't we do the same thing for violence? Just hanging a school resource officer there, that ain't enough.
Right.
You can design an environment with access control, cameras, technology, previous indicators, training, that will help the humans sustain themselves in that environment. And for schools to not do, or any company, frankly, to not do that in 2018 is crazy.
It's ridiculous. And I posted yesterday because I did a spontaneous podcast this weekend where I invited 5 active duty cops. And one of them actually had been in the Israeli military. He's now a cop up in Toronto. And, he talked about, schools in Israel and what they look like and the checkpoints, the day after 9/11, you had a plastic fork on every plane.
Right.
And you had multiple checkpoints to get on, and very, very quickly cockpit doors were reinforced. Right. And all of that, suddenly this was a very hard target, and you were going to be quite telegraphic if you were going to try to breach that target. Yeah. And so I agree, and I posted yesterday, I said, we protect our money, banks, politicians, celebrities, sporting events. We protect everything.
Yep.
Except our children.
That's right.
And it's just ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous.
So I agree. I agree 100%. Is there anything, and we're going to skip around different subjects. Is there anything that you would want to add just to this idea of, hey, if you keep the problem out, you can't have the problem in. Any thoughts on, because everyone's bitching about, I was on another podcast this morning where, one of the guys was saying it was offline, that he's been at meetings where it's the school board having the meeting where everyone's going, no, we don't even want the SRO to have a gun. And we'd rather this guy not even be in uniform because it affects the safe space.
Yeah.
I know you're a big fan of the whole entitlement PC generation.
As I said at Quantico one time in a meeting, you are trying to govern the ungovernable. Okay. You're trying to create, real, like rules or rational rules in a primal battle. Okay. Right. Where the adversary doesn't care about any of that. He is just intent on putting you down.
Right.
Period. Right. And so what we're trying to do over here is we want to have a primal battle, but in a nice way, right? And be nice about it. No. Tim Larkin's got this great book out. When violence is the answer, it's the only answer. And he's got some really good points. I don't know if you've read that book. He's got some really good points in there about the use of violence, right? Either way, good guy, bad guy, whatever you want to call it. But just the use of primal violence to win that encounter. And you're right. School boards and such would say things like, we want to disarm the deputy. Well, how do you confront, right? If you take, and I always kind of, when I do active shooter consultations, sometimes the lawyers will say, well, we don't want to have the fight piece. It's like, wait a minute. The government has already said run, hide, fight is the reasonable standard. You can't deny that, right? This isn't the UK where it's run, hide, tell. That's their guidance, right? You can't take the fight away from the human that's in that environment because that may be all they've got, right? So let's not take it away from them. Back to kind of that environmental discussion of creating an environment to keep these guys out. Like I hear the drumbeat of, let's put more guns in schools or all these other reactions, but they talk about it as if it's a foregone conclusion that, okay, we're going to have a kid or a person in the school with a gun. And, my take on that is, when I was teaching people to go overseas, I spent a lot of time teaching them how to not get kidnapped, okay? But the Bureau wanted to spend a lot of time on kidnap prevention, personal recovery. Once you're kidnapped, do these things so that when HRT or the SEALs come in, and I'm like, wait a minute. We should be spending as much time and energy on the front end. Right. I don't want to get in a trunk, all right? I don't want to be in a trunk duct taped and bound in a third world country. I'm going to spend a lot of time with situational awareness, attack avoidance. I love the technique that you did a video one time of, there were all these pins, all these previous indicators. The dude was getting ready to roll out of a car, and you rolled up and you kicked that door. I don't know if you remember this video.
Yep.
You kicked the door and literally just changed his whole mindset, disrupted the loop, whatever you want to call it. And that's what I'm thinking about. I don't want to get, and so back to the shooting, the active shooter in the schools, I don't want the kid in the school with the gun.
Right.
Right. Let's design environments so that we keep him out of there. Okay. And if he is there, okay, well then now, let's give the humans in the environment the tools to survive. Period. And that whole, I like run and fight, but when you talk about hide, And you talk to any tactician, you talk to anybody in this business, if you really drill down with them, you say, okay, would you tell your wife to hide? They go, no. Because, hide is get under the table and cover your head like a tornado or something.
Right.
No, what we say is, get into a room. If you can't get out, get in a room, lock the door, barricade, what we call reinforce a static position, but prepare yourself by finding an improvised weapon for, okay, if he comes through that door, it's time to get it on, right? But hiding, that hasn't worked out too well for the folks that have done it. If you look at Virginia Tech, a number of other active shooter incidents, it doesn't work out well.
Yeah, words are very iconic in our program. We say, hey, people argue it can be semantics. Barricade, reinforce a static position, get ready to fight, and really it should be fight, fight, fight. And so the run should be, I'm now disengaging, and I'm going to tactically move my body, and everything should be. The underbelly, the infrastructure of that is I'm getting ready to fight. Right. And I agree. And it's one of the things, just a little rant here, we talk about getting to left of bang, left of ambush. But if you look at most tactical problems in the way people train, they always practice on the right of the ambush.
Yeah.
It's how to get out of a headlock, how to do a gun disarm, and I always make the joke, I go, this is the Star Trek model of self-defense, where the bad guy was able to beam into your personal space. There were no pre-contact indicators. You didn't see him coming. Man, how does that even happen? And so we spend, and I'm glad to hear you say that, we spend 2/3 of our training on the left side of the X, understanding situational awareness and self-awareness in their relationship, and then the verbal de-escalation. And even during our choice speech protocol and de-escalation, part of the training is understanding the moral, ethical, and legal elements of that, and the behavioral, how do I actually diffuse somebody, but also using it as a Trojan horse. How do I use that where I'm actually going, okay, this isn't working, get ready for some preemptive movement. Yeah. And so it's a really brain-based approach that puts decision-making back in the individual's position in there. It's got to be up to them. And we've got to, we've been domesticated, and we need.
I was just getting ready to kind of get on my whole soapbox about the.
No, please, and that's what I was actually going to, hand this back off to you. This whole thing of where people are outsourcing their safety, waiting for the cavalry to rush in, and share your thoughts on that whole.
Well, we say that you have to be an active participant in your own survival. Okay, our ethos is empowering the individual to save their own life. That's a slide of ours. Our ethos is empowering the individual to save their own life. And then what we have to do is we have to get them back to their wild brain, right? If you read Gift of Fear, Gavin talks a lot about, the wild brain and how we have been, our DNA, we have a radar system that's hardwired into our being, and we know, our intuition tells us, man, there's just something not right about that guy, that situation, what have you. And then when he talks about, the gift of fear, what he's talking about is not the fear of, you're defriended on Facebook or your boyfriend leaves you. He's talking about primal fear of I am about to be killed here, right? And unfortunately, what's happened is people have, you can call it culture or whatever, but they don't want to believe that so-and-so could do that. That's why the media will always term people as maniacs or madmen. I've got a PowerPoint where I just keep showing that to those titles. Well, they're not madmen and they're not maniacs. They're the guy next to you. I ask them, what do these people look like? And they're like, I don't know. Well, they look like the guy next to you. They look like your neighbor. So get past this nonsense that they're something different. They're a maniac. But your wild brain is telling you, hey, that's a bad situation. That's how we got to be the apex predator. Stay out of that situation. Get away from it. But what we do is, and Gavin uses the lion in the cave analogy of, a gazelle would never walk into that cave with the lion. Never. The gazelle would get the heck out of there. And what do? Is we see the guy in the elevator and we go, oh, that's probably nothing. And we get in with it. And a soundproof steel chamber with a guy that we maybe don't feel good about. And now we're trapped, right? I talk a lot, and I'm sure you see this too, is that pushback on, being judgmental. And I love to tell my favorite, real story of that is the Gabby Giffords shooting, right, in Tucson, Arizona, the congresswoman. There was a person working for her. I'll just leave his name out, but he was an intern, and his job was to take names that day as people came up. The kid had been in the heat for like 3 hours, right? But he even developed a baseline. If you go back to Left of Bang and, what Pat's talking about, developed a baseline, right? This kid had been there. He had developed a baseline. When Jared Loeffner, the guy that did it, when he walked up, this intern said afterwards, he said, a shady-looking individual walked up to me, but I did not want to be judgmental, okay? It just, when I read it, it's still burned in my brain to this day. His statement is so like, timely of this culture. A shady looking individual walked up, but I didn't want to be judgmental. Well, hell, you were judgmental. Sorry, I said hell. But he was judgmental in the statement. He accurately assessed there's something different about this guy because he was different than the baseline. His internal mechanism, his DNA, his intuition said there's something about this guy, but I don't want to be judgmental. Well, wait a minute. Of course you're judgmental. We all are judgmental, right? Get over yourselves. And unfortunately, he went into what I call HOPE land, right? He went into HOPE that this would get better, and it didn't. And hope's not a tactical plan, by the way. And, then it got worse when this guy said, where is she? And that's why we talk about context is more important than content, right? Where is she may be said in a very nice manner.
Right.
That guy said it was another pre-instant indicator. Hey, it's getting ready to get bad. And then when the gun came out, the kid ran, used flight to get out of there. But I love talking about that story with folks to let them understand that it is in you to be aware. If you get rid of the technology and the headphones and the phone and all this stuff, But
let me back up there because this is a big part of my, I guess, the next chapter in my life, teaching self-defense to good people. I always say, hey, we all fight the same bad guy at a different point in his career and at a different location in our life. So something happens to me, right? And it's some 16-year-old punches me out. And then, he's goes to juvenile, he fights in juvenile, he gets out, now he's an adult. And, then he attacks a cop, and then he attacks somebody in SWAT, and then he joins ISIS. And I just like, it's the same bad guy. It's the same, as Tim Larkin would say, the asocial, individual. And, but, when you were describing the Arizona event and the guy says, and I do this is my big thing, and I want to share it with you and get your response / reaction to it. I believe at the end of the day, if we peeled the magic onion of what makes all of us do whatever we do or don't do, that it comes back to our ability to manage fear, to have the self-awareness to just look at fear. When somebody says, I didn't want to judge, what he's saying is, I'm afraid to make this evaluation and the consequences of being right or wrong.
That's right.
It comes down to just managing fear. And so, I create like just really like a simple kind of a dashboard for people. You're hanging out, you're enjoying your life, and you could be a tier 1 operator or a soccer mom. And then suddenly, as using, Gavin's wild brain metaphor, you get this fear spike that isn't like, oh, where are my keys? I get an adrenaline dump if I can't find my keys, but that's not the same one as, pulling up to the house and going, something's wrong. Right. And almost everybody, I talk about this in our lectures. I call it the VOV, victims of violence. Every victim of violence that I've ever interviewed, anyone that I've ever read about, anyone who's lived to tell the tale has said they had a bad feeling before the attack.
That's right.
Like 100%, and you know this. I'm preaching to the choir here. So if we know that that's a fact, then whether you're right or wrong because you're paranoid or you just saw a scary movie, that if you choose safety, that's my big thing to help you. Always choose safety. # choose safety. The downside of choosing safety is you're late, but you're safe. Right. The upside is it was a real event, and now you have a little time and space. You got a problem, but at least you're not in that primal startle flinch, covering and turning away. You're acknowledging it. But what we've done is a society, we're so domesticated that cognitive dissonance, and I don't want to embarrass myself, and I don't want to be that guy. And you look at the Florida incident where, or you look at San Bernardino, where people, I don't want to report.
The neighbors wouldn't report it. The garage activity. That's right.
Right. But then you also have, hey, we did call the FBI in Florida and they didn't do anything. Like, where are we as a society?
Yeah. What I always say to folks, and the FBI is going to have some answers. They better be held accountable for some answers on that one. But what I always tell folks is, look, if you report your coworker or your neighbor or whatever, okay, fine. You've done your that part of it, but that doesn't mean that danger or that concern that you had is gone away. No. That guy's still every bit as dangerous to you now as he was, 5 minutes ago before you called the FBI or you called 911. So, I used to work in an environment where, one guy coworker was having an affair with another coworker. Well, we all knew it, and I was ready for him to snap at a moment's notice. I mean, people may have known about it, but I still had my own plan.
Right.
What you can't do is source out your survival. You can't just say, oh, well, I've notified so-and-so, and therefore I'm just going to go back into my hole. No.
Yeah.
And back to your point about, safety, Gavin always says, I'd rather you be rude than be a victim. Especially when you're talking about, talking to females about rape avoidance or what have you. It's like, I would rather you be rude to a guy who's displaying pins,
right?
Be victimized, right? Be rude. If he's a good guy, he'll understand.
Right. Yeah. And this is, and that's why I come back to, if there's one thing that we could change immediately that would enhance the survivability at a transcendent level. I don't need to, like my daughter says to me, my youngest daughter says to me, hey, I'm starting trigonometry. And I said, I'm so glad you're studying that course, because that comes up for me every day. There's like some sort of like trigonometry problem. And she goes like, are you serious? I go, no. And I was making fun of school and subjects and shit and all of that. And so she's confused that, should I be in school or not? And I'm going, actually, no, let's, but if you're studying something, anyone listening to this, don't freak out. Stay in school or don't. But it was, if we could put a subject in school, and that is understanding the psychology of fear. I've got a play on words. I don't know if I've shared it to you or you've seen it online, but you remember the No Fear Company, right? So I grew up afraid of everything. I was a competitive athlete. I was afraid to win. I was afraid to lose. I always had a wicked adrenaline dump. We were in the day growing up in the 60s and 70s. There weren't performance coaches. You didn't talk about your butterflies and you're a pussy if you're like scared and so on and so forth. And probably still to this day, people think that way. And so I just started intuitively seeking out anything that would help me mitigate or understand fear, because it was all consuming for me. And about 20 years ago in a class on a whiteboard, I love whiteboards, I was talking about fear and the no fear. And I tell people, like, I had every no fear t-shirt, and I make the joke in my lectures, they must have been defective, because no matter how many I bought, I still had fear. And, and then one day on the whiteboard, it just came, and we wrote the letters K and W on either side of the N and the O. And it was like, what if we looked at no fear like this? What if we all said, hey, we all have comfort zones. That's shit that just happens to us frequently enough that we got acclimated to that. I've had tier 1 operators in my class that have trouble asking a question or standing up to do a teach back.
Right.
But if you ask them to kick down a door and charge towards an armed gunman, they go, I got that. Right. And so you're afraid to talk, but you're not afraid to get in a gunfight. And so people need to understand that courage is a muscle. And if you stress inoculate properly, but I still come back to, James, I'm so passionate about this, is how do we get, because when that guy says like, yeah, I was hoping that wasn't a bad guy, or I didn't want to be rude, what we're really talking about, if I peel that down, I go, just say it. Yeah, I don't want things to escalate. I don't want to be embarrassed. It still comes down to, I don't know how to manage fear.
Right.
I'm like Gavin said, I'm allowing imaginary consequences to immobilize me in the present I'm visualizing this future event that hasn't even happened, and it's putting me either it's creating some sort of emotional PTSD or it's actually putting me in danger. Yeah. It's ridiculous. I mean, we need to really educate people on that.
Yep. And we culturally, I mean, I love what you're doing, and similar people like you by teaching folks these skills that they don't have. I mean, 100 years ago, boxing was a real thing. Everyone knew that heavyweight
wrestling, yeah.
Right? I mean, Jack Johnson, had 39 rounds or something, Madison Square Garden, 100,000 people were there. Now you can't get that many people to a boxing match. Maybe Floyd, right? Maybe. But boxing, pugilism, wrestling, all of these martial sports were commonplace. People would fight. I mean, you get in a fight all the time. Now,
but you didn't even have to. You don't have to go back that long. Where if you're living out in the frontier, you know how to hunt, you know how to shoot, you know to skin a rabbit, and you knew you were going to die and you knew if somebody came on your property, you knew if they were there to rape and pillage. I mean, everyone. And there's this image, I think, and I sometimes talk about this that back in the day where you've got you and I went into town to sell our pelts and we left the wives on the ranch. Like, they weren't movie characters. If they pulled out a rifle, their heart was pounding, their butterflies in their stomach, their palms were sweaty. I think we've got to re-educate people that it's like the Customato quote, speaking of boxing, is that, the difference between the hero and the coward is what they do with their fear, that they both feel it. And that there is no state, there's no place where you get to where you go, I've got no fear, because that's semantics as well. You got some people that are adrenaline junkies who talk about it. And I think, they're certainly the anomalies, but if you're a good Samaritan, you can be scared shitless, but you just know what the right thing to do is.
That's right. We would see the academy, the FBI academy, you would see frequently, because you put them in those situations where the answer was, you got to get aggressive. And the ones that were, from a military background or some law enforcement, they knew, they'd holster the weapon, they'd go at the guy, they'd go hands on, they'd put him on his face. But for the others, I'm not going to call them sheep at all, but the ones that just didn't have any real life experience, who never been in a fight, never been physical with anyone, they literally had no idea what to do, because they've been conditioned that if they draw their weapon, say FBI freeze, the guy's just going to immediately comply. And I would have role players tell them, you can go F yourself. I'm not going to do any of that.
Right.
Now what you do, right? Open hand, no weapon. You can't shoot him. What you got now? Right? I was trying to elicit them to holster their weapon, go hands on, drywall would be busted up. Oh, well. That's what's going to happen out there, right? And you would see them literally just freeze. Or you would see the military guys, hey, holster, boom, just go without, and you're like, hey, what's your background? Military. And
right.
It was an amazing social experiment. We weren't, that wasn't,
sure.
But you saw it. You really saw it.
You mentioned before, run, hide, fight, and we talked about, some of the language, on that. I want to, we're having fun getting to know each other more, but I want this to be, because I'm going to get this out there this week. I want this to be something where we've got a worldwide community that's kind of, there are some people that are deer in the headlights going, oh my God. There's some people, we talked about like people visualizing the most negative things. So, I'm sure that the teacher that was shielding the students, I'm sure that he wished he had a gun on him at that moment.
Right.
And I talked about this in other podcasts that, those guys hanging out behind the car, waiting for whatever, 4 minutes goes by. That's a long time in a gunfight. I said, here's the interesting is that, courage is contagious, but so is cowardice. Right. And it's an interesting psychology there, because had crews come out with the gun and started firing at the car, I have no doubt that one, if not all of them, would have stood up and lit him up, tried to, and so it's that weird dynamic. And my takeaway on this isn't that we'll ever get to know the answer. Like you said, when we first started, you weren't there, you don't know. And I tell people, when sometimes people ask, they hear me talking with this type of emotion, they go, well, are you saying that you would have done this? And I'm saying, I have no idea what I do, but I would like to believe that my training will support what I must do, what I believe is right. And so what I wanted to get was just some more thoughts on you. If we, turn the conversation back towards, your your ethos, the Gavin de Becker ethos of, the active participant in your own survival. Just, are there any thoughts that you can share right now about, hey, how do I make my home or my workplace? I can't afford to go study with Gavin de Becker or Tony Blauer. What can I do for myself just to make my environment a little safer, my family safer?
Sure. So mental rehearsal is the very first thing that we always talk about, right? So you take a workplace violence situation, be it, active shooter, mental rehearsal where would you go? And I tell people this when I teach them, it's like, okay, in your workspace, and I talk probabilities. Okay. So don't focus on all possibilities. Okay. Like, I'm not telling you to have a freaking asteroid plan. If an asteroid hits the earth, right? But I live in the East Coast, so I don't have a tsunami plan, but I got a hurricane plan. Okay. Cause they're probable where I live. So I tell these folks, focus on probabilities. Well, how do I know the probabilities? Well, you pay attention to what's going on in culture. So an active shooter in the workspace, yeah, that may be a probability for you. And what would you do? So I tell them, mentally prepare yourself what you would do, right? And then to really kind of, because I'm really big in keeping things simple, you really have got three choices. Once you're aware of the situation, it's confront it, get the hell away from it by evacuate, or call somebody about it. Okay, that's it. It's like the military's shoot, move, and communicate. Now, which one you're going to choose? Hey, brother, I don't know. You're in the situation. But, as I sit here, if a guy, in my office jumps up with a gun, I'm going to confront it because I got no other choice. If I hide, he's probably going to shoot me, right? I can't run anywhere. I'm kind of pinned into my office. I'm going at it. What do I got? I got a pair of scissors and I got a fire extinguisher and I got a real positive approach to my own survival, right? And my mentality is, you weren't ready for me, brother. You
Right.
woke up today and you brought that gun to work. Your ass wasn't ready for me. I'll tell you that right now because I'm going to win. Okay.
Nice.
But, what if I'm in the bathroom and I hear the shooting upstairs? Well, then I'm just getting the hell out of there. I'm evacuating. I'm leaving. I'll take some coworkers with me, right? But I'm getting out of there. And once I'm free of the scene, then I'll call 911. Because what I don't want to do, and going back to where you were with the cops, is they're burning the one thing they don't have any of, and that's time. Right? We used to always say at the FBI Academy, you ain't gonna run out of bullets, my man. You're gonna run out of time. So quit wasting it. Okay? You're never gonna have 100% of the information. I'm sure some of those guys running those patrol cars were wanting more information. You're never gonna have 100% information. I tell my trainees, if you're a 51%er, if you can make a decision based on 51% information, partial information, you'll probably be very good at this type of work. But if you're an analyst or an analyzer and you have to have 100% of the information, then tactics is probably not the best place for you, my friend, because the only time we ever have 100% of the information is after the event. That's it, right?
Right.
So back to your thing, how do we help these people, right? So mental rehearsal. What would you do given that situation, right? Shoot, move, communicate. That's it. Make the right decision based on your unique situation. For your home, it's very, very simple. Get a dog. All these security systems we always recommend, a dog does all of that. It detects, it deters, it notifies, it prevents.
Nice.
Get a damn dog. It doesn't have to be a Rottie or a boxer or whatever. It can be any type of dog. And then hang those signs. Hang those beware dog signs, right? That scares people. I've interviewed burglars. They don't like those signs. And then illuminate the environment. Put some lights on your home, right? Put some motion activated lights on your home so that you make yourself a little bit more difficult of a target, right? Make it more difficult for them. And then pay attention, for gosh sakes. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a great book called Blink, right? And so if you're going to be targeted, they're going to have to do some surveillance on you. Well, you're going to see that guy. You're going to see that car in that area where you have to go through what we call a red zone. Well, pay attention to it. If you see that car that doesn't fit to your environment, right? Don't, and I talk a lot about this, don't create an alibi for it, okay?
Right.
Don't go, oh, well, it's probably nothing. The neighbor, that's probably his cousin from down the street. You don't know any of that, man. You're doing all that to, like you were talking about, to not deal with your fear, okay? The reality is that person that you've never seen before is in a perfect location to see your comings and goings. And oh, by the way, When you drove by, he made a note of it. He took note of it. He saw you. He wrote something down. He looked in your direction. Okay, that's the type of stuff that you need to be notifying someone about, right? Call 911, tell them you got a suspicious person in your neighborhood. But have people, basically don't subcontract out your security. 911 is fine, but what are you going to do in the interim? It's going to take a while for those guys to get there, right? That problem is still in front of you. I remember training a girl one time, and it was a kidnapping scenario, and I was looking for them to use their weapons, and she's on the phone, Tony. She's burning up this phone in this training scenario, and I'm like, golly. And she ends up getting executed in training. And afterwards, in the debrief, I'm like, what were you doing with that phone? She's like, well, I was putting my fingerprints on it to leave DNA. I'm like, well, I thought you were going to take it and beat them to death with it. That's what I thought you were going to do, because that would have been the right answer. You are calling people who cannot help you now, right? That's why when I talk shoot, move, and communicate, that 911 call better damn well come when you're safe and you're out of that environment, right? Because you don't want to be calling 911 when that thing's right in front of you, because that's going to be a long and painful phone call for you.
Yeah, it's an interesting epiphany you try to invoke when I tell people, hey, as much as the police want to be there and stop whatever's happening, you're the first responder in your confrontation, and the police are actually the third. There's probably you're the first, and then there's somebody else going, holy shit, and they may or may not be the courageous bystander that you hope, and then eventually, the good guys with the training get there. Very, very fascinating stuff. And there's so many areas that I want to get into. One of the areas is kind of like a touchy-feely one, and it triggers a lot of people, and I use that word on purpose, but our society has gotten so soft. Mm-hmm. So sensitive, and you look even just like how polarized things have gotten with what happened here, where if you say to somebody, teachers should be armed, somebody throws like a generalized statement over that. That's all we need as a teacher to shoot some kid, and they immediately go to the worst case scenario, as opposed to what would be a legitimate vetting protocol to find the right teachers that could, I'm less polite than you, but I don't want, somebody who's specializing in gender fluid studies with purple hair who promotes, burning the flag to be in the gun class. And I don't think they would be, but I agree with you 100%. Let's bring this back to, being safe, making your house safe, making your school safe. All these people that go, this is ridiculous. They all have locks on their door. They all have, and some of the people who are the most self-righteous about this actually have armed guards, right. But share, and then maybe I'll just open a little Pandora's box, or, but you obviously have some deep thoughts on, like this part of our society that's in complete denial about the existence of evil and what we need to do in their denial state.
Right. And so, a bunch of things. One would be that, like I know there's documentary evidence that, people with a gun in that environment, they have stopped these things. That's not deniable. Okay. There have also been documented examples of a guy with a gun who's shot the wrong person. That's happened too. What I contend, and going full circle back to the beginning, is my friend's death was specifically caused by a lack of training. Okay, he was shot and killed by his partner, okay, in a domestic dispute, all craziness going on, where the guy just shot, and he ended up shooting the bad guy and my friend. It was a complete training issue, but it really got me down this thinking path of where you said, okay, if we're going to arm these people, if we can find legitimate training and find the right type of people to train them. And that's the key, brother, right? Who decides that, right? Who decides what's legitimate, right? And if we use law enforcement as our guide, if that's what they're going to, and I've heard that, well, we're just going to have them taught by local law enforcement and they'll meet that same standard. Well, in one of the towns I used to live in, their standard was 50 rounds a year, right? I asked a police officer at my kid's school, how many rounds a year do you shoot? He said 50. I don't want you shooting.
That's the minimum, yeah.
Kid.
Yeah.
I shoot freaking, 600 rounds a month.
Right.
I'm not even in law enforcement anymore. Don't tell me about 50 rounds a month, right? So to me, I believe if you're going to arm people like at the FBI and here, you have a moral obligation to make sure that that person is deadly serious about carrying that gun for them. Okay? Deadly serious. Like they eat it, sleep it, think it, they train, they carry correctly. I hear a lot of these talks, well, they're going to have the gun in a locked case somewhere. Well, for me, I mean, unless that shooter is giving them enough preemptive indicators that I can get to that gun case, right? I don't know how effective that's going to be, right?
Right.
To me, as Gavin likes to say, security countermeasures, that security measures, they're in two groups: those that reduce risk and those that reduce anxiety. Okay, and so this thing with this gun locked somewhere where I'm not even close to it, well, that's just a reduction of anxiety.
Right.
It doesn't actually reduce your risk, right? Hell, it might even raise your risk because you think, well, we have a school resource officer, we have this, we have that. So for me, whatever, if you're going to arm these folks, just let's make sure that they are dedicated, right? That they really want to do this. And that's very hard to find. Yeah.
Yeah.
Train them. Who's going to pay for that? Right. That's going to be a big, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to equip them? What standard are you going to use? You use the old Air Marshal standard before 9/11. That thing was incredibly difficult, right? That was a tough firearms course. Or is it just going to be a CCW course that's pretty simple? You're talking about kids. So these teachers, are they going to teach them ballistic properties of the weapon system? Are going to teach them, what that round will do? Will it go through drywall? Will it not? I mean, these are all things that they're going to have to think about. And oh, by the way, there's a thing called the law. Are they going to teach them legal use, right? Because if they're wrong, they can go to jail.
Right.
That's a great thing. Larkin talks about in his book. He's like, you're going to a jail cell or a pine box, possibly.
Yep.
You use violence, right? So, to me, I always like to go 10 questions deep on something. So, I'm that guy, Tony. So my kid goes to a new school. We're doing the tour, and this will help your listeners. And, of course, the administrators tell me about all this great security they have no idea what I do. I said, oh, really? And they're like, yeah, we have an active shooter plan with this. I said, I'd like to read all of your plans. And the lady just kind of stopped. She said, excuse me? I said, I will be back tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to read all of your plans. And I did. I came back the next day. She said, in 20 years at this school, no one has ever asked to read these things. And so I read them. And, all I saw was a bunch of, interesting things, not trained, no training. Right. And I saw a lot of gaps, right? Saw a lot of gaps. And when I talked to the school resource officer, I'm like, hey, again, how many rounds are you shooting a year? How much tactical training are you getting for the year? What's your first priority? What I want to hear is, we'll protect human life. Okay. So you're going to go right to the sound of gunfire, right? That's what I want to hear. But if I get a lot of, I got to call my sergeant. Now I start to hear, no, right?
What, when you say the 10 questions deep, is that a metaphor, or do you literally have 10 questions?
I literally have 10 questions. So if I'm doing an audit, for instance, medical, like you say you've got a medical plan. Okay. What's your training? What equipment do you carry? What, allergies and other medical situations does your protectee have? What's your nearest level 1 trauma center? What's your nearest LZ? Do you know the phone number to the pilots? Just keep keep going deep on that thing, because most competent folks can get through 3 or 4, right?
Right.
But the ones that really are kind of snowing you, they only get past that first one, right? Like use of force policy. We carry guns. Okay, what's your use of force policy? Crickets. Well, you have to know that, my friend, before you can drop the hammer on somebody, right?
Right.
So that's that 10 questions deep methodology. You should be able to go pretty deep on these things.
Yeah, it's funny in the back of one of Gavin's books, he lists questions you should ask like a new babysitter, right?
Yeah, protecting the gift,
right?
Yeah.
And so when we were hiring a babysitter once, and this is so funny, it made me think about this. And I said to my wife, I showed her the back. I said, hey, listen, like if I'm not here, I want you to go through these questions. So she's like reading them, and she goes, oh my God, I can't ask these questions. And I said, like, like, think about what you're saying here. And this comes back to that fear. This was embarrassing her. And so I happened to be, I came in, they were talking, and my wife, Jessie, she goes, "Oh my God, she's great." She gives me the, like, I really like her, and she's sweet and everything. And I sit down and I say, I just, "Hey, great, thanks, sorry I was late. Hey, have you ever, in any of your other previous employments, have you ever hit any of the kids, physically hit one of the kids?"
Nice.
And she, like the deer in the headlight, and she was a very quick cover. "Absolutely not." I'd like, no. But there was that one moment there, and she leaves, and my wife looks at me after her, and I said, "She won't be calling back, right?" And she's like, "What?" Like, she didn't even pick up on it, right? But the woman didn't return our calls and everything, and it was fascinating. But it was, and then I tell people this, that it was outside my comfort zone too. But it's such a powerful,
right?
Like,
Absolutely.
those are your kids.
You can't get that wrong. Like that, you can't get that wrong, right? Like that's as a parent, you can't get that wrong, right? And so we'll have people call us and talk to us about nanny cams, and I don't mean anything against nanny cam. If you sell those and you're listening, nothing against you. I hope you do well. But if you ask me, what kind of nanny cam you get, what I will tell you is you probably need to fire your nanny, okay? Because you are clearly suspicious of the nanny. Get rid of her.
Right.
Get another one.
I was and it was funny. It was about all that time. But my first born, Nicky, I had custody of him from the time he was a month old. And so I hired a friend of the family as a nanny, and she was living, because I was, just jump starting my seminar career. And so, I made her come to a bunch of seminars, which she had no interest in doing. And I said, "No, like, you don't have a choice. You're coming to these weekend seminars, and you're going to learn all of this knife and gun and all this stuff." And she's like this pacifist going, I go, "Marcy, like, I don't think you understand this, but you're actually a bodyguard. You're not the nanny, right? You're my son's bodyguard when I'm not there." And she actually got that, and then got into it. And it was kind of like, I don't, I tell people, like, the ability to protect yourself or a loved one is arguably the single most important skill you could possess. Every problem in life, James, that we have, you can outsource. You can, you have a toothache, you can go to the dentist. You can take care of it yourself, but you can go to the dentist. Your roof's leaking, you can fix it yourself, but you call, like, a roofing company. Problem with the car, every problem in life except for one, you can outsource to a subject matter expert. If you're on your phone texting and something happens to you, you don't even have time to dial 911. You're the first responder in your confrontation. And so I say, the ability to protect yourself or a loved one, to be your own bodyguard, to make that choice, to be the courageous bystander, like, that is everything. And I know that resonates with everything that you guys do. Are there...
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you. But that's the button, right? So frequently you'll hear people say, "Well, I could never hurt someone. I could never." Okay, yeah, you could.
Right.
If your button gets pushed, right? And most people, as a kid, right? It's that kid, right? It may not be them. They could take a little bit of punishment, but you start talking about hurting that kid, and they become ferocious, right? I remember I was somewhere, I used to live in Virginia, and I was coming home from work, and I picked up a magazine, and this girl, the lady behind the counter, she's like, "Oh, I just don't," it was a Recoil magazine. I don't know if you ever read that. It's about our life, kind of guns and tactics and DT and stuff. And the lady, sweet lady, she's like, "I just don't think I could ever hurt anybody." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, that's fine." She's like, "My son's a Marine. He says I should buy a gun." I'm like, "Okay, ma'am, I'm just trying to buy this thing and go the heck home." And she keeps on. And I finally just stopped. I said, "Okay, that son of yours you're talking about?" And she said, "Yeah." So what if I had him pinned to a chair, duct taped, and I took a drill bit and I started driving it into his kneecap? And her eyes get like this big around. She just gets, her heart rate pumps up. She's pissed. And I'm like, "See?" She's like, "What just happened?" I'm like, "I just pushed your button." Okay.
Right.
And most people, especially parents, they have a button. And Gavin talks a lot about it in Protecting the Gift, about a lady gouging a guy's eyes out because he tried to hurt, her kid.
Right.
Humans are capable of unbelievable amounts of violence.
Yeah. No, that's a huge part of our Be Your Own Bodyguard course, because a lot of the people, again, coming out of this like domesticated, era, that that's the area we have to have them reconnect with, that they are a human weapon system, and we move like archaeologists, helping them rediscover this hidden part of them. It's just been buried a little while. Yep. So most of your work, if not all of your work, is at the higher level, right? Gavin de Becker doesn't have like a general public division. It's bodyguards, corporations, schools, hospitals, governments, and stuff like that. Tell us a little bit about the company, and then I don't know who's all the demographics of everyone listening, but if people want to get in touch with you or read more stuff on the company, just listen. What do we got?
Yeah, great. So we've been around for 40 years. Gavin started a protection firm in Hollywood because he literally looked around the landscape and he's like, I can do it better. And he did. And he started, he was 19 years old. And for 40 years, we've been doing it. We like to say, we know that we've contracted and supervised 14 million hours of protective service. Our bread and butter is executive protection with, high-end clients. We can't ever say who, but top 1% type folks. Corporations also employ us as security at their corporations, but our real nuts and bolts is executive protection. It's protecting at-risk individuals in transit between point A, point B, and residential security, known public appearances, those types of things. We have about 750 bodyguards. We'll probably hit 1,000 this year. We're all over the U.S. We're in 16 foreign countries, just growing exponentially. It's one of those businesses that, because of the way things are, every time there's a violent act, we get more business. But very discerning. We have very stringent background investigations. We have a physical fitness standard that we don't play around with. You have to pass it. You have to pass it every year. If you don't pass it, you get to retake it in 60 days. And if you fail it, well, then you're going to be looking for work. It's not like the government. There's real standards that we hold you accountable to here. But if people are interested, go on GAVINDeBecker.com. They're usually hiring. I'm sure we're hiring now somewhere. But we run a protection school every month. And if folks don't want to join, they can still come to the school, learn about executive protection, what we've learned over 40 years, and go out into the world. And I tell people, even if you don't stay with us, and you're going to do this job, just be true to it. Be true to being a professional protector, right?
Love it. I love it. Well, I'm sure we will be talking again. I know there's a ton of information here, and the big thing I try to do just on this podcast is have people listen to a legitimate conversation and then walk away going, I'm a little bit smarter, therefore, I'm a little bit safer. If we're talking about self-defense and fear management and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed listening. I know we'll be on some other calls there, and as things happen in the world, I'm hoping you'll be available as a resource down the road.
Always. I enjoy it because you're one of those guys. You're out there and you're doing it, and it's just a beautiful thing, brother. You're empowering people, and I love that. That's all it's about. Empower these people to protect their lives. Thank you for what you're doing. It's an honor to be here with you. You're one of those guys, right? You're like a pillar of this. So it's a big deal for me to talk to you. So thank you.
Thank you, James. I appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Okay, we're going to wrap this up. I will get this out as soon as possible, and we can hopefully do the two things that you quoted Gavin on: reduce people's anxiety and reduce their risk.
That's great.
As a result of this. James, thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Be safe.
You too. Bye.